Evening, gentlemen. In this video we're going to take a look at an Alekhine win in 1927 in the New York Open, just a few months before the World Championship against Capablanca. In this game he's playing with the white pieces against Frank Marshall, who was the US champion from 1909 to 1936. So not as much as a joke as you'll be led to believe after you see this game.
This position is the so-called Döry Indian, where Marshall has decided to directly occupy the center with his knight. It's quite opportunistic. This arises out of an anti-Nimzowitsch Indian line, which was very popular with Kasparov here. Knight f3 simply avoiding this the Nimzowitsch Indian pin on the knight, which will now be met with bishop d2 or knight d2. Yeah, perhaps more logical would have been to place the less developed knight on d2, like so, after which black would likely continue to aim his pieces at the center from afar, as is the principle behind the Nimzowitsch Indian lines in general. Out of castles he could play f5, just solidifying his grip over the center and making it difficult for white to play e4 quickly. So instead we see the f knight coming to d2. Perhaps Alekhine felt that the ability to play f3 was important. Bishop b4, Alekhine isn't too impressed by these gesticulations and simply played queen c2, just preparing knight c3. And after d5, knight c3 and f5, we've transposed to a Dutch, where Marshall has a very firm grip of the central square, and he argues that this weakening of e5 is less important since the knight has already spent a move to move away from it.
Yeah, so naturally Alekhine cannot countenance this knight in his face, so he snaps it off. And after f takes e4, we see that black's going to get the f-file, but white's going to argue that development is more important. So after bishop f4, castles, and e3, solidifying the center and this bishop here. Black replies c6. We get some more natural developing moves. And a3, and Marshall wisely chooses to keep his dark square bishop, given all his pawns are currently on light squares. And in fact he's going to attempt to trade off white's long-range sniper, which is really well placed here on f4. So after castles we get bishop g5. And white goes for the obvious break.
Right, and Alekhine is attempting to break the center open and exploit black's slight lack in development. And indeed we see that after bishop takes f4 and e takes f4, rook takes f4 was played, which was a mistake. E takes f3 was called for. The problem with rook takes f4 is that after recapturing here, Alekhine wrests control of the f-file. Now Marshall's lag in development is becoming more and more apparent, and for some unclear reason he decided to play e5 here, which is, to be honest, helping Alekhine's agenda, as it's now opening things up slightly. Alekhine shifts his queen over, and c5. Yeah, indeed quite baffling. At least the picture that this gives us is fantastic, though.
Right, none of these pawn breaks really favour Marshall. As a general principle, playing aggressively when you aren't properly developed isn't a great idea. So here Alekhine has numerous ways to resolve the tension, one of which is knight takes d5. However, better is either d takes e5, which is what occurred in the game, or e takes d5. And after e takes d4, knight e4, queen h4, we can see that white has a very comfortable position and black is struggling to develop. This bishop has no really good squares to go to, as over here it will be staring at this pawn. Now as mentioned, Alekhine opts for d takes e5, and after d4 we'll see that Alekhine is actually more interested in black's monarch than in this lowly knight. So after d takes e3 and queen f7 check, king h8, we'll see that in this position black doesn't have anything intelligent to do. Knight takes here obviously leads to mate, and so Alekhine takes the time to recapture this pawn. Queen g8 is played, and queen e7. And it's worth mentioning that the previous 6 or so moves are the absolute best. An alternative to queen e7, which is e6, which one might be tempted to play, doesn't actually work, because after knight f6, the best white can do is actually force a perpetual. Knight takes f6, g takes f6, queen takes, queen g7, queen d8, and we have a perpetual. If after queen g8 you attempt to e7, this walks into bishop h3, and after this queen trades, I'll see that we're just down a rook for this dubious pawn here.
So black has stolen a piece, but it is questionable whether these are worth anything. He came up with h6, which was the best move, But after h5 he cracked with a5, which is very unconvincing. Unfortunately, the stockfish line suggested us to bleed a rook via king h7, which can be followed up by e6, knight e5 and rook f8, where queen e6 is necessary, but this drops a rook. So at this point it's clear that even the famous Marshall swindle is likely to be insufficient to hold this game. Alekhine very precisely advances e6 pawn at this point. Black cannot allow rook f8, so he decided to play g6 here, just counter-attacking a piece. Unfortunately this doesn't help him, and after bishop d7 and rook f7, with a very strong threat of queen f6, he had to sack himself off. Now Alekhine missed a chance to be extremely clinical here with rook f7, which forces a quick mate, simply leaving all these pieces hanging. Of course the king is most important. Now an attempt to survive from black is rook a6. Unfortunately, the key difference with this subtle improvement is that queen f7 does not save him from checkmate, since white can promote a new queen here and give checkmate very quickly on g7. Now queen takes f7 does not extend Marshall's miserable life all that long, since after e takes f7, g takes h5, Alekhine could have played e5, cheekily taking control of this f6 escape square, and after a non-move we would see a queen e8, king g7 and queen g8 mate. Now the less precise e takes d7 was also sufficient, however, since after bishop d7 and rook f7, Marshall resigned, in view of the threat of queen f6 with devastating effect.
Yeah, so Alekhine made short work of Marshall here. Seems like the US champion had a bad game and likely overlooked the knight sacrifice on c3, after which his position was pretty hopeless. As we saw, stockfish suggested sacking off a rook, and from then on, your only chance really is to somehow swindle your opponent, as he was in fact known for, but his position was just too much. At the end of the day, Alekhine wins and comes second in this New York Open. Good preparation for the ensuing World Championship match at Capablanca.